we never taught people really about the system of legalism. I've got a new favorite judge. I don't know if you guys have checked him out, named Judge William Young, who's a Reagan appointee in Massachusetts, who's been rendering some extraordinary decisions. But in it, he said basically that when the president gets it in his head to act, he disregards everything. The Constitution, the criminal law, the civil law, the common law, regulations, customs, norms, values, boundaries. And I thought that was a pretty perceptive statement, and it raises the question of, well, why do we obey the law? You know, why do we have a system of legalism where we consider rule following central to living in a civilized society? That's not anything anybody ever posed when I was in law school, but it's a central question right now. You know.
Think of how foundational that is. That's where we are. I should say the breaking news, Letitia James has been indicted.
I haven't been indicted tonight, have I?
Not that I know of. And the more recent breaking news, a federal judge in Chicago has blocked the deployment of troops to that city.
Yes, indeed.
On the grounds that the representation of what is happening in Chicago, the facts, are, quote, simply unreliable, that he cannot believe what the federal government is telling the court.
Yeah.
And
I mean, but the Constitution is very clear about this in Article 1, Section 8, that Congress can call up or pass laws to provide for the calling up of the militias in order to repel invasions, suppress insurrections, or to enforce the law if the law is not being enforced. And there's no foreign invasion. The law is being perfectly enforced. And so is there an insurrection? I mean, you could use any test in the world, but why not use Donald Trump's test? Because he didn't see an insurrection when 140 of our police officers were wounded and injured and hospitalized, and the House and the Senate were stormed and the members driven out, and his own vice president nearly killed. There wasn't an insurrection then. He didn't call out the National Guard then. So what's going on in Portland or San Francisco or Chicago that remotely approximates that?
Well, let me play devil's advocate, literally. No, not literally, but and that is this. So I think one of the characteristics of this administration has been to find, and that's what Project 2025 was all about, every crease, every pinhole, every wrinkle in the statutes which might offer, if you look at it real squinty, an opening for additional authorities for the President of the United States. So that line that is in the Insurrection Act, if enforcing federal law is impracticable, is essentially what they're using here, which is that there are people getting in the way of ICE officers, and people do see some of these protests blocking the way, or even more, chasing ICE officers away from their duly appointed job.
So it's worse than January 6th, you're saying?
I'm not saying that, but both might fit. Certainly, my judgment, January 6th did, but that notion that
I say his judgment was a little bit off on January 6th, you're saying, but he's making the right decision, the right call. I mean, look, the reason we've got Marbury versus Madison, the reason why it's emphatically the province and the duty of the court to say what the law is that we don't leave it up to one guy to decide whether or not to cast aside the whole Constitution and due process and federalism and the rule of law. That's not going to work for us. So, there have been more than 400 cases brought now, including some by the McDowell Social Justice Center, and thank you for doing that. And the opponents of this administration have won more than 3/4 of the time in the district courts, and approximately the same proportion at the appeals court. So the rule of law is holding overwhelmingly at the district and the appeals court level. And the problem is just one court in the whole land, and their shadow emergency docket where everything gets reversed in the other direction with one sentence or one paragraph or what have you. But don't let people completely despair about this, because these judges, whether they're Democratic appointees or Democrat appointees, as they say, or Republican appointees, it doesn't make any difference, because overwhelmingly they're finding against Donald Trump.
Except for that high court. That's where the province and duty of the judiciary, quote, originated, right?
Well, this is a gerrymandered and stacked and packed Supreme Court. If you take my constituent, Merrick Garland, who was Chief Judge of the D.C. Circuit, he was nominated by President Obama in February of 2016 to take Justice Scalia's position. And Mitch McConnell said, no, 11 months is too close to the next election. We're going to let the people decide. Of course, the people had decided 4 years before when Barack Obama got one of those bona fide 4-year terms in office, and he nominated Merrick Garland, but he didn't get a hearing and he didn't get a vote. And then, as you know, in late September of 2020, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, then everybody said to Mitch McConnell, well, you're not going to have hearings and a vote 2 months before the election, are you? And he started laughing and he said, oh, that was just a rule for the Democrats. So there's all kinds of illegitimacy that pervade the current Supreme Court, and people are going to have to focus on the details of the ethics crisis on the court and the illegitimate way that it has been stacked and packed and sliced and diced with a kind of judicial gerrymandering.
Well, they got life tenure. So what's the fix? Do you agree with Democrats who say that if and when, if we continue to have free and fair elections, Democrats take power again, they should stack the court, pack the court?
Well, no, I think we should unstack the court and unpack the court. It's already been packed.
You're going to
and
wait
stacked.
a while, though.
So,
you're going to wait for years with the age of these justices.
You know, I think there are a lot of things that can be done short of that and before doing that. I will say that, you know, the number of justices that we have is not fixed in the Constitution. That's a statutory matter. It's changed 9 different times in the course of our history. And, you know, we've got 13 federal circuits, right? We have 9 justices. 5 of the justices come from New York City. There's 1 justice for each borough in New York City, okay? That makes no sense. So the vast majority of federal circuits don't have a single justice, right? So we could correct that particular form of inequity and disproportion while trying to deal with some of the stacking and packing that's taken place during this grim period. And we could say we'll have 13 justices, 1 for each federal circuit, and we'll stagger their terms and call it an 18-year term, for example, and we could introduce that, and I think that would begin to solve some of this like tremendous crisis of legitimacy that we're in with respect to the judiciary.
So that is changing the nature, the makeup of the court through legislation and the president signing it, yeah.
I mean, it's going to take a long time, but I think there are a lot of other problems. I mean, you know, this court decides, I mean, the Supreme Court decides by granting cert on what cases it's going to hear. And so we're starting to see a pattern, like with, you know, the decision that was, or the case that was just argued, it was yesterday or the day before about, you know, what do they call it, where basically they're curing people of homosexuality.
Conversion,
right?
Conversion therapy.
So state laws have been passed against conversion therapy as a form of licensed medical treatment. Got the right, anybody can convince anybody of anything, right? If you want to go convince somebody not to be straight or not to be gay or not to be trans or whatever, you got a right to do it. But as a matter of medical practice, the states have said that does not conform to the best scientific standards. Well, it seems clear, based on the oral argument, that this whole case was a setup for them to follow through like they did in the bake shop case, in a, you know, right-wing culture war, let's turn the clock back. You know, a lot of other countries do it differently in terms of how cases come before the court. In the UK, I think they have 14 members in the court. Somebody will correct me if that's wrong. But they sit in panels of 5, and a different panel will, you can't sit on a case that you yourself have decided essentially to grant cert on, right? So a different panel will decide whether a case is cert-worthy, whether it should come before the court. That's a much better way of doing it, because what we're getting now is completely ideological agendas being promoted through the Supreme Court. And so that they're acting like, you know, a corrupt city council outside of Cook County or something, you know, like the way they do it. So I knew that would get a rise out of you. By the way, did we say hi to your sister from Chicago?
There she is.
So, yeah. There she is. Hello. Hi. Oh, awesome. Yeah. That's great. I have another constituent from Chicago who said to me, you know, Congressman Raskin, I love being represented by you, but when I die, I want to be buried back in Chicago. And I said, why? And she said, I want to remain politically active after I die. So,
That's good. Well, that opens the door. I was in Chicago yesterday. Yeah. I was there for a Cubs game. The Cubs game. Brought my 11-year-old son. They won, which was great. But I figured I should walk around a little bit and see what the feel of that city is under siege, as several of your colleagues who represent the city have said. And, you know, I'm in Wrigleyville, so it's very prosperous and peaceful there. But I did, there's a couple that came up to me and said, oh, you're the news guy. You're the used-to-be news guy. And, you know,
you're still the news guy.
Yeah, so whatever.
You bring us good news every day, Terry Moran.
Thank you.
Trying.
So I said, okay, and there was no camera or anything like that. Well, yeah, it's kind of, and I, as neutrally as I could, what do you think what's going on here? You know, it's kind of crazy. Zoom. They went totally quiet. And it was a middle-aged couple, Latino. Their son, they live out in the suburbs. Their son had moved into Wrigleyville, and they did not want to, it was a chill. So that even in that prosperous, tidy part of Chicago, these people who ought to have, they're well-established Americans, the shadow falls over them.
This is why the Jimmy Kimmel thing was so important in my mind. I mean, some people are saying that's just a comedian, but comedy's important. I mean, there are tens of millions of people who are living off of those late-night talk show comedians, and the truth is, and this, you know, goes back to the emperor's got no clothes. Like, if you can laugh about a leader, then you don't have to be afraid. But if you can't laugh, if you can't make jokes about the president, then a regime of fear has set in. And of course, you know, all the right-wingers knew that with, you know, Obama. They'd make fun of Obama. He wasn't born in the country. He's not a real citizen. They make fun of Biden, and you know, but make fun of Donald Trump. We're going to kick you off the air. We're going to get you off the air. That's authoritarianism. So that was a big win when millions of people said no way, and ABC finally stood up. I wish. Who was your employer?
ABC.
Yeah. Well, I wish they learned their lesson earlier. It's time for them to call you back.
No, it's much better being independent today than being in ABC.
Yeah.
It just is. It's more fun, but also it's a growing part of the media, and ABC is not.
Well, good for
and
you.
It is very difficult to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Given the constraints of the very traditional corporate media that they have. But
Did you feel good about what happened with Jimmy Kimmel? I mean,
I did, yeah. I was surprised, and you're exactly right, because you know, Bob Iger, who runs Disney, doesn't want these problems, but the outcry and the shame associated with what he did, you know, I think that...
Look, the American tradition of presidential disrespect goes back to the beginning, right? I mean, Tom Paine, who used to be friends with George Washington, was making merciless fun of him and saying, you know, I don't know if you're a hypocrite or you never had principles in the first place. You know, you've got a right to talk like that about the president. Those of us who aspire and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people. We are not kings and queens and emperors and lords. For as long as we hold our office, we are just servants of the people. And the moment somebody is acting like a monarch, that is the moment to evict, eject, reject, impeach, try, convict, remove, disqualify, start all over again.
But he's winning. And I guess the question
He's not winning. He's not winning in court. And the Democrats, there have been, I think it's 42 or 43 special elections since the year began. We are running consistently, and the average is we're up 16 points, outperforming where we were in the exact same elections. We just won a state Senate election in Lancaster County, PA, that had not been won by a Democrat since the 1880s. We are winning the vast majority of these special elections all over the country.
Are the elections safe?
So don't fall for the gloom and doom. That's part of the strategy, man. That Vladimir Putin is all over that, trying to make everybody feel like morose and our destiny is authoritarianism. It's not. Fascism will not be the end of democracy. Democracy will be the end of fascism, right here in America, and we're going to make it happen. So,
I agree with that. My job is to push a little bit, and I will push a little bit because he's obviously going after the elections.
Yes.
Which are the voice of the people. And if I had told you 10 years ago that Donald Trump was going to bring us to the brink of an authoritarian regime, in establishing an authoritarian regime in this country, you would have laughed, I think, maybe.
Wait, how many years ago?
10.
Yeah.
All right. So if I ask you on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being it's over, democracy's done, 1 being we're all safe and sound,
yeah.
Where are you on the worry scale?
I mean, if I weren't worried, I wouldn't be in this. But I know we're going to win. I know we're going to get through this thing. And we're going to come through a lot stronger than we were before. There's just no alternative because people all over the world are counting on us. The people in Ukraine are counting on us to fight off that bloodthirsty imperialist invasion, which Donald Trump has done everything in his power to facilitate and to support. So where will people fighting for freedom and democracy and human rights be anywhere else in the world if we allow our country to go down the road of Trump and Putin and Orban and Modi and, you name it?
So I live out in Frederick, Maryland now, which is
used to be part of the 8th District.
Used to be,
yes,
not anymore.
Yeah.
It's a purple area, and I feel very blessed and lucky to be in such an area because, as Michelle Obama said, it's hard to hate up close. And I think the old American neighborliness is still in effect there.
Frederick's incredible. It's an incredible place.
I love it.
An amazing
we
place,
love it out there.
Yeah.
When I got fired, for example, my next door neighbor came running across the lawn, and he said, "Terry, I'm a Trump supporter." And I said, "Sean, I would never have known, given the big sign that was on your lawn for several weeks. But thank you."
He had a Kamala Harris sign?
He did not have a Kamala Harris sign. My point being, I'm agreeing with you because I think most Americans, the best kept secret in American life is that most people are still normal. That in fact, they're more like Sean than they are. But my question is, your colleagues in the Congress, how many Republicans are Sean, and how many Republicans are the worst person in your Facebook feed?
But see, this is like my dad taught us, you never give up on anybody. Well, you don't give up on Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a hero this week, right? I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying that we've got to end the shutdown. The Democrats did not create the shutdown. The Republicans controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House. She's saying her son's health care premiums are through the roof. And, so you don't give up on anybody is, from my perspective. And, everybody's on my case because I'm good friends with Lauren Boebert from Colorado.
You're good friends with Lauren Boebert?
Yeah. I mean, I tease her.
I love that.
I called her Lauren Gropert when she had her thing. But no, I'm good for, Lauren Boebert is really kind of a wonderful person, and people say to me, well, you can't stand her politics. I say, yeah, I hate her politics. She's got atrocious politics, but she's a good person. I'm like, yeah, everybody says you got to be bipartisan, then you actually make a friend, then everybody's on your case. Who do you think's in the Republican Party in Congress these days? Abraham Lincoln? So yes, we take our friends from where we can find them, but you don't give up on anybody because, in addition to that really strong authoritarian politics in the GOP today, there's a lot of chaos and a lot of confusion. And, there are people over there who are there because they're really confused about what they stand for. And, Marjorie Taylor Greene is starting to wake up to what's really happening in their party.
I know you've got a time constraint. I want to ask just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
First, on still staying in Congress there, if you took Donald Trump out of the picture, and do you think there is an air that can stir the viscera of people, whether they're your colleagues or my neighbors, the way he does, or does it go away? In other words, is this a permanent change in the politics of the country, the tone, the manner in which we speak to each other? I'm thinking of Attorney General Pam Bondi the other day in the Senate. Yeah. Do you think that we are stuck with this, or is there a return to normal, something new?
I mean, I think it's going to be a fight. There's a profound longing for a return to basic decency and civility, which I encounter wherever I go. But at the same time, there's a whole political economy organized around mobilizing hatred and bigotry and ignorance. So I don't know. I do think we're in the fight of our lives. I don't know that it's necessarily over right when he retires, but I think Thomas Jefferson wrote this beautiful letter in 1798. A friend of his wrote, this guy John Taylor wrote, despairing of the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, the Alien Sedition Act, and he's saying, is this the same country that just had a revolution against kings and tyrants, 12 years ago? Or, is this the same country? And Jefferson wrote him back and he said, a little patience and the reign of witches shall pass over. Their spells dissolve and the people recovering their true sight restore their government to its true principles. In the meantime, we're suffering all the horrors and malignancies of the current period. But if the game runs against us sometimes at home, as inevitably it will, we must have patience because this is a game where principles are at stake.
Well, I'm clapping for that. I'm leaving clapping. That's Jefferson. Thank you. One more. For the lawyers here who have done so much work in social justice areas for the poor, the marginalized, and stuff like that, how important is that in this struggle that you've been talking about and fighting in the Congress?
Yeah, but I mean, that's what this is all about. I mean, for the lawyers in the room who have been actual champions for equal protection and the freedom of speech and for people's right to be who they are and so on. We are living in the counter reaction to that. This is the backlash. It's like after Reconstruction and the Civil War, the backlash again. And this is the backlash that we're living through. So everybody's got to hang tough. We've been through these times before, throughout our history. That's what this is. You should view this as, in a certain sense, a backwards tribute to the work that, all of the civilizing movements of our days have done and the lawyers who've worked with it. I think the lawyers have probably tried to take a little bit too much credit because I don't think the lawyers really get anywhere. We lawyers don't really get anywhere without social movements that create the framework for change, and that's part of the problem that we're seeing right now, that a lot of the movements went to sleep, but that's the importance of Indivisible and putting millions of the people in the streets next Saturday, October 18th. I hope I'll see you guys all at No King's Day, because that is what any lawyer has got to understand today. You can call yourself legal realist, law and economist, originalist, whatever it is, but everybody's got to understand that going to court today is completely framed by politics and by the correlation of political forces in the society. And so I'll leave you with the words of the great Tom Paine, who came over in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution. He fell in love with the promise of America. He said, if this land lives up to its values and ideals, it'll become, he said, an asylum to humanity. Not an insane asylum, mind you, but a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from political and intellectual and religious persecution and oppression all over the world. And then he wrote the great pamphlet of our history, Common Sense, which ignited the American Revolution. And by common sense, he meant we have 5 senses, if we're fortunate, and a 6th sense, a common sense. He said, a sense we have in common when we're willing to reason and speak together and listen to each other without dogma and superstition and what we would call today propaganda, disinformation, and fake news. Common sense. And so, anyway, 1776 was a tough year, as you know, and we like to think that the whole country was unified against King George and tyranny, and it wasn't true. I'm reading a really interesting book about that right now by H.W. Brown's called The First Civil War, about how the American Revolution split the country down the middle. Ben Franklin's son, who was the governor of New Jersey, ended up in prison for siding with the crown. And so all the communities, families, everybody was split. Half of the people were running around. The smarter half was running around saying, well, we want to be like the law firms that get on the president's side, right? You can't beat the greatest empire that ever lived. There's never been a mightier empire than the British Empire. You can't beat the kings and the queens and the people who control the law, the judges. You can't beat the lords, and you can't disentangle church and state. The state has always controlled the church, right? And then half the people are saying, let's give it a try, right? Let's try to put government on the principle of the consent of the governed, as Jefferson put it, right? Unalienable rights of the people, everybody being created equal. Let's pledge to each other our lives, our property, our sacred honor in order to create something different. But anyway, Paine wanted to write this other pamphlet to give people some hope during a dark time when people were making their decisions about which way to go and nobody knew. And he wrote this beautiful pamphlet called The American Crisis. So I'm going to I'll quote a little passage for you. This is the one that Pelosi always makes me update the language for because she says Paine was a feminist and he wouldn't mind. And so I accept that. In fact, Paine was fighting for women's right to vote in the 18th century, but he said, these are the times that try men and women's souls. He said, the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will shrink at this moment from the service of their cause and their country, but everyone that stands with us now will win the love and the favor and the affection of every man and every woman for all time. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this saving consolation. The more difficult the struggle, the more glorious in the end will be our victory. So let's make that victory ours.
All right, Congressman.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you.